9. What is the smallest simple step I can take now? How do we start good habits or end bad ones? What daily routine will help me become limitless? You have a reason or purpose to do something. You have the necessary energy to do it. What is missing? A small simple step. S3. The tiniest action you can take to get you closer to your goal. One that requires minimal effort or energy. Over time, these become habits. That's the reason I filled this book with the small simple steps called quick starts. Back in the 1920s, a Russian psychologist, Bluma Zygarnik, was sitting in a Viennese restaurant when she noticed that the waiters swirling around her in the busy eatery were highly efficient at remembering customer orders while they were in process but tended to forget who had what as soon as the orders were filled. Intrigued by this, she ran a study where she had people perform simple tasks while they were sometimes interrupted. Afterward, she queried participants about which tasks they remembered and which they did not, finding that those who'd been interrupted were twice as likely to remember the things they'd been doing when they'd been interrupted than the things they'd been able to complete without interruption. She came to the conclusion, subsequently known as the Zygarnik effect, that SPECIALPMISLLAMS. Uncompleted tasks created a level of tension that keeps that task at the front of our minds until it is completed. In all likelihood, you're familiar with this tension from your experience with procrastination. When you have something you know you need to do and you keep putting it off, it weighs on you, even making it more difficult to do anything else well as long as this task goes uncompleted. What you need to do seems hard, or it seems like less fun than the other things you could be doing, or it's going to be uncomfortable, or you've simply convinced yourself that you have plenty of time to get to it later. We still struggle to complete tasks when we are clear on our vision for our lives and know who we want to become. Why is it still so hard to act, even when we have sustained motivation? One of the most significant reasons that people fail to act is that we feel overwhelmed by what we need to do. A project or a chore might seem so big and time-consuming that you can't imagine how you're ever going to get it done. We look at the project in its entirety and immediately feel that the task at hand is too big, so we shut down or put it off. Incomplete tasks and procrastinating often led to frequent and unhelpful thought patterns, says psychologist Hadassah Lipzik. These thoughts can impact on sleep, trigger anxiety symptoms, and further impact on a person's mental and emotional resources. 1. Be kind to yourself. If you struggle to get something done with some amount of regularity, there's a good chance that you feel guilty about this and you beat yourself up over it. It's likely you give yourself a much harder time about it than is helpful. We already know that unfinished tasks create tension in your brain. If you layer guilt and shame on top of this, you're making it even harder to get a task done, and you're making yourself miserable. Feeling guilty when you're away from work, when you aren't in a position to do anything about it, is not helpful, and can be painful, writes Dr. Art Markman, a professor of psychology and marketing at University of Texas, Austin. It will make you feel worse about your job in general and spoil time that you could be spending with friends, family, or engaging in an enjoyable activity. Shame, though, is a different story. There is evidence that people will explicitly procrastinate to avoid shame. Feeling shame about work you have not completed is likely to make the problem worse, not better, making it an emotion that is almost never helpful. 2. Feeling bad about your lack of progress is likely to make it more difficult for you to stop procrastinating. So, give yourself a break. Beating yourself up isn't going to improve anything. And, since you're reading this book now, you're already taking steps to avoid procrastinating in the future. In my experience, the best way to deal with this is to find a way to break the task into bite-sized pieces, which led to habits that led toward success. Circling back to the Zygarnik effect, every time you complete one of these smaller tasks, you get to take that weight off your mind, and as each of these subtasks is finished, you're that much closer to completing the task overall. Take baby steps. Podcast guest Dr. B.J. Fogg, the founder and director of the Behavior Design Lab at Stanford University and the author of Tiny Habits, has been studying human behavior for more than 2 decades. What he's learned is that only 3 things can change a person's behavior long term. One is to have an epiphany, which very few people can summon on demand. Another is to change your environment, which is possible for nearly everyone, but not necessarily feasible at any given time. The third is to, as Dr. Fogg puts it, take baby steps. 3. I like the way this story illustrates the principle of small, simple steps. A king was watching a great magician perform his act. The crowd was enthralled and so was the king. At the end, The audience roared with approval, and the king said, "What a gift this man has, a God-given talent." But a wise counselor said to the king, "My lord, genius is made, not born. This magician's skill is the result of discipline and practice. These talents have been learned and honed over time with determination and discipline." The king was troubled by this message. The counselor's challenge had spoiled his pleasure in the magician's arts. Limited and spiteful man, how dare you criticize a true genius? As I said, you either have it or you don't, and you most certainly don't. The king turned to his bodyguard and said, "Throw this man into the deepest dungeon, and," he added for the counselor's benefit, "so you won't be lonely, you can have 2 of your kind to keep you company. You shall have 2 piglets as cellmates." From the very first day of his imprisonment, the wise counselor practiced running up the steps of his cell to the prison door carrying in each hand a piglet. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the piglets steadily grew into sturdy boars, and with every day of practice the wise counselor increased his power and strength. One day the king remembered the wise counselor and was curious to see how imprisonment had humbled him. He had the wise counselor summoned. When the prisoner appeared, he was a man of powerful physique, carrying a boar on each arm. The king exclaimed, "What a gift this man has, a God-given talent." The wise counselor replied, "My lord, genius is made, not born. My skill is the result of discipline and practice. These talents have been learned and honed over time with determination and discipline." 4. One of the only things that is likely to change your behavior is to make incremental progress. You really don't want to make dinner? Make something simple for your family to snack on while you cook dinner later. You're having trouble writing that big speech for next month's conference? Just write the keynote to the speech now. You're overwhelmed by the amount of reading you need to do for your economics class? Set a goal for yourself of reading the first chapter. Like the wise counselor, you must take it one step at a time, one day at a time. What you'll notice in all of these scenarios is 2 things. One is that they present you with something achievable, a win on the way to reaching the championship of getting this job done. The other is that they all put you in a situation where you're likely to get even more accomplished. You're already in the kitchen now, so you might as well finish making dinner. You've gotten through the keynote and you're on a roll, so maybe it makes sense to draft some more pages. The first chapter of your economics text wasn't nearly as dry as it seemed from the outside, and you already have the book open. You can handle a few more chapters by breaking a task that you're procrastinating about into smaller pieces. The path to getting it done becomes clear. The best way to deal with the tension between what you want and what you've done so far to achieve it is to remember what the Zeigarnik effect teaches us. You're not going to be able to ease your mind about this task until you complete it. So get yourself moving toward completion. Start somewhere, anywhere. Even if you don't have the energy or the motivation to get the entire thing done, get started on getting it done. You'll be thankful for the relief. Quick start. Think about an important task you've been putting off. What is it? How can you break it down into simpler steps that you can do each day? On autopilot, small simple steps repeated led to habits. Our habits are a core part of who we are. Various studies have shown that somewhere between 40 and 50% of what we do every day is the product of a habit. That means that half of our lives is governed by what scientists term automaticity. This percentage might sound high to you. It certainly did to me the first time I heard it. But consider how many things you do every day without really thinking about them. You brush your teeth without thinking about it. You check your phone at predictable intervals. You drive to the office and don't particularly recall how you got there. You zip up your jacket, get a glass out of the cupboard, and click on the TV remote automatically. This, of course, is essential to how we conduct our lives. Could you imagine how overwhelming it would be if you had to think about every single thing you did? If even brushing your teeth required some conscious level of calculation, you'd be exhausted by 10 in the morning. Without habit loops, our brains would shut down, overwhelmed by the minutiae of daily life, writes Charles Duhigg in his best-selling book, The Power of Habit. People whose basal ganglia are damaged by injury or disease often become mentally paralyzed. They have trouble performing basic activities, such as opening a door or deciding what to eat. They lose the ability to ignore insignificant details. One study, for example, found that patients with basal ganglia injuries couldn't recognize facial expressions, including fear and disgust, because they were perpetually uncertain about which part of the face to focus on. 5. James Clear, author of the best-selling book Atomic Habits, says, the habits you repeat, or don't repeat, every day largely determine your health, wealth, and happiness. Knowing how to change your habits means knowing how to confidently own and manage your days. Focus on the behaviors that have the highest impact, and reverse engineer the life you want. 6. All habits serve you in some way. Clear told me, as you go through life, you face a variety of problems. You need to tie your shoe. Your brain is automating the solution to that problem. That's what a habit is. It's the solution to a recurring problem that you face throughout life. One that you've employed so many times that you can do it without thinking. If the solution doesn't work anymore, then your brain will update it. 7. Clear identifies the habit loop as having 4 components: a cue, a craving, a response, and a reward. Using the example of turning on a light when you enter a room, the cue is walking into the room and finding it dark. The craving is feeling that there would be some value in the room not being dark. The response is flipping on the light switch, and the reward is that the room is no longer dark. 8. You can apply this loop to any of your habits, such as getting your mail when you come home from work. The cue is reaching your driveway or front door at the end of the day. The craving is hoping there's something in the mailbox. The response is going to the mailbox to find out, and the reward is getting the mail out of your mailbox. You probably didn't think about any of this until you actually had the mail in your hands. The habit loop. Creating habits to automate essential parts of our lives is a fundamental streamlining technique that we do largely unconsciously, often to our benefit. Of course, we also automate all kinds of things that we'd probably be much better off not turning into habits. I'm sure you know some version of this. Perhaps a cue is walking past your kitchen pantry. The craving comes from the knowledge that your favorite chips are in the pantry, and your innate desire to eat them. The response is that you go into the pantry, open the bag of chips, and take out a big handful, and the reward is crunchy, salty, fatty deliciousness that doesn't benefit your health in any way. Our negative habits operate with the same level of automaticity as our healthy ones. Those chips are in your stomach before you've even had the opportunity to register that you were stuffing them in your mouth. Now, because you're in the process of becoming limitless, you know that perpetuating negative behaviors is a drain on your superpowers. So, how do you break bad habits, and, just as importantly, how do you create new habits that will help you getting in the habit? Before we get to this, let's talk for a moment about how long it takes to form a habit. In a study for University College London, Philippa Lally, Cornelia H. M. van Jaarsveld, Henry W. W. Potts, and Jane Wardle took participants through the process of developing a new healthy eating, drinking, or exercise habit, such as drinking water with lunch or jogging before dinner. They were asked to perform this new behavior based on specific situational cues every day for 84 days. For the majority of participants, they wrote automaticity increased steadily over the days of the study, supporting the assumption that repeating a behavior in a consistent setting increases automaticity. By the end of the study, they'd found that it took an average of 66 days for the new behavior to become a habit, though it took individual participants as little as 18 days and as many as 254.9. It is also widely assumed that breaking a bad habit isn't about ending that habit, but rather about replacing it with a different, more constructive habit. Dr. Elliot Berkman, director of the Social and Affective Neuroscience Laboratory at the University of Oregon, notes, it's much easier to start doing something new than to stop doing something habitual without a replacement behavior. That's one reason why smoking cessation aids such as nicotine gum or inhalers tend to be more effective than the nicotine patch. 10. So, if the process of starting a new habit, such as setting aside time to read every day, is fundamentally the same as the process of ending a negative habit, such as grabbing those chips every time you pass the pantry, how does it work? As with so many of the things we've discussed in this book, motivation plays a key role. Speaking specifically about the effort to break habits, Dr. Thomas G. Plant, adjunct clinical professor of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University School of Medicine, said, it depends on how much you really want to break the habit. Many people are ambivalent. They want to lose weight, but they like the foods they eat. They want to reduce their alcohol consumption but love their happy hour. They want to stop picking their nails, but it reduces stress for them. So, one important issue is how strongly you really want to break the habit in question. Second, how established is the problem habit? It is easier to break a new habit than an old one. Third, what are the consequences of not breaking the habit? Will a partner leave you? Will you lose a job? Will you get sick? Will something really bad happen if you don't change? 11. Dr. B.J. Fogg created the Fogg behavior model to identify the circumstances that need to be present for behavior change to occur. For a target behavior to happen, he notes, a person must have sufficient motivation, sufficient ability, and an effective prompt. All three factors must be present at the same instant for the behavior to occur. 12. In other words, you need three things in place in order to develop a habit. You need the desire to do it, since it is exceedingly difficult to make habitual anything you really don't want to do. You need the skills to do it, since it's nearly impossible to make a habit out of anything you don't have the capacity to accomplish. And you need something to get the habit loop started, what James Clear and others refer to as the cue. Let's look at each element in turn. Motivation. We've talked about motivation already, but it's worth revisiting the subject here to see it from Fogg's perspective. Fogg identifies three key motivators. 1. Pleasure pain. This is the most immediate motivator. In this case, the behavior has a nearly immediate payoff, positive or negative. I believe pleasure pain is a primitive response, says Fogg, and it functions adaptively in hunger, sex, and other activities related to self-preservation and propagation of our genes. 13. 2. Hope fear. Unlike the immediacy of the previous motivator, this one is all about anticipation. When you're hopeful, you're anticipating something good happening. When you're fearful, you're anticipating the opposite. This dimension is at times more powerful than pleasure pain, as is evidenced in everyday behavior. Fogg notes, for example, in some situations, people will accept pain, a flu shot, in order to overcome fear, anticipation of getting the flu. 14. 3. Social acceptance rejection. Humans have always desired to be accepted by their peers, dating back to the time when being ostracized could mean a death sentence, and this remains an extremely strong motivator. The power of social motivation is likely hardwired into us and perhaps all other creatures that historically depended on living in groups to survive. 15. Ability. Fogg equates ability with simplicity, noting that when something is simple for us, we are considerably more likely to do it. He defines 6 categories of simplicity. 1. Time. We only perceive something to be simple if we have the time available to perform the function. 2. Money. Similarly, if something stretches our financial resources, we do not consider it simple. 3. Physical effort. We consider things that are physically easy for us to be simple. 4. Brain cycles. Simple things don't tax our thinking, and we shy away from things that require us to think too hard. 5. Social deviance. This goes back to the acceptance motivation. A simple act fits into societal norms. 6. Non-routine. How far something is out of one's normal routine will define its level of simplicity. Prompts. Finally, Fogg notes 3 types of prompts. 1. Spark. A spark is a type of prompt that immediately leads to a form of motivation. For example, if opening your email leads to a level of fear over what you might find there, you're likely to adopt a habit that will change that fear. 2. Facilitator. This type of prompt works when motivation is high, but ability is low. For example, if you want to use a certain kind of software on your computer but are tech-averse, a tool that makes that software easier for you to use is likely to cause you to adopt this behavior. 3. Signal. In some cases, you'll have both high motivation and high ability. The only other thing you need to make a behavior a habit is some kind of reminder or signal. If you love making brain smoothies, all you need is to walk into your kitchen in the morning and see the blender to prompt you to make one. Quick start. Can you identify the habits you want to break? What is that one habit that's holding you back from doing other important things in your day? Write it down. Then identify the prompts that trigger you to perform that habit. Creating a new habit. The Fogg behavior model shows us everything that needs to be in place for a particular behavior to become a habit. We know that making habits of behaviors we consider good for us is important to our growth, and we also know that the key to breaking bad habits is to replace them with more constructive ones. But how do you make something a habit? Just remember WIN. W is for want. Make sure you really want it. It's nearly impossible to turn something into a habit if you don't want to do that thing. Does one of the motivators in the Fogg model apply to the habit you're trying to adopt? If not, is there something close to this habit that might accomplish something similar for you? I is for innate. Does the new habit you're trying to adopt align well with your innate abilities? Remember that you're unlikely to make something a habit when it is consistently difficult for you to perform. If the habit you're trying to adopt is something that you're good at or you know you can be good at, you're well on your way. N is for now. Create a prompt for yourself that encourages you to perform the new habit now. This can be anything from a reminder on your phone to placing something in your office that makes you remember to set aside time to do what you're setting out to do. Growing your life one habit at a time. In case you're still wondering how much of an effect establishing good habits can have on your life, let me share a story about one of our clients. Xiang suffered from schizophrenia and depression. He often heard voices telling him to hurt himself or others, and he endured several stints in psychiatric wards because of this. After finding the right medication and emerging from his latest round of treatment, he discovered my podcast and learned some of the tactics that I teach in my school. He started listening on a regular basis and participated in the Quick Challenge, a series of exercises I take people through to introduce novelty to their thinking and therefore keep their brains tuned for learning. At first, this was hard for Xiang, but he focused on doing just 2 particular challenges: brushing his teeth with his opposite hand and taking a cold shower every morning. He increased his time under the cold water by 1 minute each week and, in doing so, discovered that being able to do something hard, like standing under freezing cold water for several minutes each morning, made him realize that there were areas in his life in which he was fighting for his limitations. Building from these quick challenge experiences, he started applying what he was learning about habits and behavior change to other areas. Xiang's life improved dramatically. He took his driver's license test and passed. He changed his diet, cut out sugary drinks, and started taking a 5-minute jog in the park every morning. He started reading books, the first being Mindset by Carol Dweck, and as he read, he listened to Baroque music to pace his reading and distract himself from hallucinations. It took him a month to finish the book, but when he did, he felt a sense of confidence.